a new subscriber to the Patreon channel, and I'm going to pronounce its name wrong, and I apologise. N Apa E Costim. I'm sure that's wrong. If there's some way to let me know how your name is pronounced, please, please do it. Anyway, asked a very good question. In fact, I was thrilled really to get the request. He asked for my take on propositions 6 and 7 in part 4 of the Ethics. And in fact, these are pivotal propositions along with proposition 53 in part 4, which I shall also at least give reference to. I'm not sure whether I'll go through the whole thing. But the gist of propositions 6 and 7 in part 4 are that we can be overcome by passive emotions. It's kind of obvious, but the analysis is very interesting and very powerful. So a little bit of background. If you have listened to the other podcasts, you'll understand that a passive emotion is one that typically involves an external agent. It's not something that comes wholly from you. So if someone is angry with you, it will create some kind of emotion in you, and that is a passive response. If someone tells you some amazingly good news, like you've just won the lottery, then that will create a passive emotion. But these passive emotions can be what we would typically call positive or negative. They're all passive at the end of the day. One is really neither better than the other, although Spinoza says we always prefer pleasure to pain. And why not? Because it's an increase in our power. And that's the other thing to bear in mind in all this. All this always has reference to power. Our power to exist. That is the driving force behind all of this. So if something enhances your power of existence, then you'll be excited and have positive emotions, as people call them. And if you experience something that diminishes your power of existence, then you will have so-called negative emotions: fear, anger, hatred, whatever. So with that kind of background, let me just reference proposition 17 in part 2, because this is very important. In fact, as it happens, I happen to be looking at it last night. And in proposition 17 in part 2, and Spinoza references it a lot, it's very important. What we call imagination or images are effectively the way that our body has remembered things by having an image imposed on it. A simple image obviously is light waves coming into your eye and you remember what something looks like. That is your eyes being, or your brain in actual fact, being fed with an image that it remembers. It's been modified in some way. Well, your body as a whole can remember things, according to Spinoza anyway. And those are images. And when we are imagining, then we call upon those kinds of images. And what Spinoza says in proposition 17 is that when an image impacts upon us, or we create an image of something, that image will stay until it is in some way negated. So maybe you have an image of someone who's died. That image still remains with you. That impression of being around them and all the rest of it stays with you. And it's not likely to go away. It'd be very hard to negate that image. But there are some images that can be negated, and I'll get into that as we go through propositions 6 and 7. What these propositions are about are, as I've said, how we are, or how we can be overcome by the passions. There is an antidote to that, and the proposition 53 gives the antidote. But proposition 6 is saying how we can be affected. Spinoza uses the word stubbornly, a stubbornly fixed passion or idea. How this thing can persist, for a long, long time because of some strong impression or some strong image that we got at some point. And proposition 7 is how we need to use one impression or one passion to negate another. So let me go through proposition 6 first. He says the force of any passive emotion can surpass the rest of man's activities or power, so that the emotion stays firmly fixed in him. So we can be overwhelmed by something that's happened, and it results in an emotion that stays with us. So, for example, let's say that you are in a war situation, and you see some truly horrific things. And typically, people who see those things suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. And that horror stays with them. It remains firmly fixed in them. Or let's say as a child you are repeatedly told by one of your parents that you're stupid. That is a sufficiently diminishing thing, and if it's repeated numerous times, that feeling of being inadequate or inferior will stay with you for the rest of your life, probably, unless you do some work to understand it. So these emotions can stay firmly fixed. So the proof says the force and increase of any passive emotion and its persistence in existing is defined by the power of an external cause compared with our own power, and so can surpass man's power. There are 1,000,001 things out there that are more powerful than you, and some of them can affect you adversely. When you are a child, your parents are infinitely more powerful than you are, and so they can create an impression that stays with you for the rest of your life, an image, as Spinoza would call it, an image that stays with you for the rest of your life. And that is a dreadful thing. Your parents are like God to children, and for a parent to treat a child in that way is, well, I would say unforgivable. Spinoza would just say it was inevitable given the circumstances, but anyway, it happens. So the force of any passive emotion can surpass the rest of man's activities or power, so that the emotion stays firmly fixed in him. And most of us have at least a couple of things like that. We've been shaped by some very strong impression when we were young, maybe, or maybe even in later life. If you have a bullying boss and you've been in your work for a long time, that will modify your emotional state, probably fairly long term. And in fact, if you're a child and you're always told, oh, if you're going out to play with your friends, you need to look your best. No one's going to like you if you don't look your best. Or, we're going to visit Auntie so-and-so and Uncle so-and-so, and you need to look your best. No one's going to like you if you don't look your best. And then when this person grows up, they feel they have to spend inordinate amounts of time looking good for people to accept them. That will be a persistent impression or image that person carries around with them, possibly for the rest of their life. And it can only be undone by a stronger impression in the opposite direction, which is what proposition 7 is about. I'll get to that in a moment. So Spinoza here is not saying that we are, or that we should become, or whatever, or that we are able to become totally invulnerable. We're always going to be affected by things, and some of those things will be stronger than our own power for existence, because of course when someone is telling someone that you are not acceptable unless you look good, they are diminishing their power. They are making them dependent on some external agent, i.e. the way they look to other people. And that is a diminishing thing, and it's an inadequate thing. If you've listened to the previous podcasts about what is adequate and inadequate. So let's get on to proposition 7, which is a pivotal proposition in my opinion. So he says an emotion cannot be checked or destroyed except by a contrary emotion which is stronger than the emotion which is to be checked. I'll read that again. An emotion cannot be checked or destroyed except by a contrary emotion which is stronger than the emotion which is to be checked. In some translations, and I think probably elsewhere in this translation, Spinoza says that one pleasure cannot be overcome unless it's by a greater pleasure. So let's say that you enjoy drinking alcohol or smoking. I enjoy smoking. I don't. I smoke cigars, I just puff on them, but I enjoy it. The only way that that can be overcome is if I find a pleasure that is greater and effectively destroys the first pleasure. I haven't found it yet. And if you've listened to previous things that I've put out, the wolf has to have its say. If you deny the wolf, it will come out somewhere, typically in more harmful ways than the thing that you've tried to negate. Anyway, an emotion cannot be checked or destroyed except by a contrary emotion which is stronger than the emotion which is to be checked. That's how it works. If you have no pleasure that is stronger than the pleasure that you are currently experiencing, you'll stick with the first pleasure. We are driven by pleasure and move away from pain. That is the way we work. And pleasure and pain are just enhanced or diminished power for existence, ultimately. So the proof goes on to say, an emotion, insofar as it is related to the mind, is an idea whereby the mind affirms a greater or less force of existence in its body than was previously the case. So, this is this thing of being enhanced or diminished in life. So when the mind is assailed by an emotion, the body at the same time is affected by an affection whereby its power of acting is increased or diminished. Furthermore, and this is very important, furthermore, this affection of the body receives from its own cause its force for persisting in its own being. Now, isn't that a strange statement? I'll read it again. This affection of the body receives from its own cause its force for persisting in its own being, and therefore this force cannot be checked or destroyed except by a corporeal cause. So the affection of your body wants to persist. Everything wants to persist. If you throw a stone, it wants to persist in motion. Its motion is resisted by the air, so resistance in the air, and the fact it falls to the ground, so gravity eventually stops its motion. But everything wants to persist in the way that it is moving or behaving or whatever. It's a very ancient idea. It's the idea behind the Kanatas. That's the way it works. And so even a habit, it's clearly something that is wanting to persist in its being. It's wanting to not be destroyed. What is also interesting is where he says, and therefore this force cannot be checked or destroyed except by a corporeal cause. If only I'd known that 40 years ago. It would embarrass me to tell you all the blind alleys I've been down, but if I'd understood that 40 years ago, I would have saved myself so much trouble. We can only modify things within us because we're bodies, and the mind is the idea of the body. Please remember that. We can only modify our minds through corporeal things. In Zen meditation they say that the attention should be on the body, because only the body can still the mind. That's another topic, but it happens to be true. Anyway, and therefore this force cannot be checked or destroyed except by a corporeal cause which affects the body with an affection contrary to the other and stronger than it. So we cannot, so for example, the smoking. I cannot just say to myself, I'm going to stop smoking, I'm going to stop smoking. And I do need to stop smoking, I know I do. But those words in the mind just don't do anything. There needs to be a corporeal cause for me to move away from smoking. Something physical. So maybe it would be when I fancy a smoke, I go for a walk instead. I don't know if that would work or not. Maybe it would. Maybe it would be chewing on some gum. Maybe I'll try a few of these things. Although the smoking thing doesn't worry me all that much because I don't do it so much and I don't inhale. So anyway, so the way you overcome one behavior, if you like, one emotion, is by an emotion that is opposite to it and stronger, and that emotion has to come from something physical. That's why that's why all these positive thinking types, it's just dreadful. And in fact, I know someone, got to know him recently, who has just finished all the oh God, what's his name? Tony Robbins. He bought the whole Tony Robbins cell, bought all the courses, and is now an extremely anxious person because, of course, all his positive affirmations and all the rest of it come to nothing. It's just chatter in the mind, has no power whatsoever. In fact, there's a wonderful bit in Proposition 49 in Part 2 where Spinoza says, we cannot will according to the chatter in the mind. I forget the exact words, but that's essentially what he said. Anyway, to get on with this. So we need something physical, contrary to the thing that is affecting us. So where have I got to? Stronger. The mind will be affected by the idea of an affection stronger than and contrary to the earlier one. That is, the mind will be affected by an emotion stronger than and contrary to the previous one, an emotion which will exclude or destroy the existence of the previous one. So an emotion cannot be either destroyed or checked except by a contrary and stronger emotion. That's the way the emotions work. Emotions work for or against other emotions. Just thinking stuff isn't going to do it. It has to be corporeal, as Spinoza says, or in the body, because the emotions are in the body. So the corollary says, an emotion, insofar as it is related to the mind, can neither be checked nor destroyed except through the idea of an affection of the body, contrary to and stronger than the affection which we are experiencing. For the emotion we are experiencing can neither be checked nor destroyed except by an emotion stronger than and contrary to it, that is, except through the idea of an affection of the body stronger than and contrary to the affection we are experiencing. So we use emotions to deal with other emotions. And this has already gone on quite a long time. I was going to go through Proposition 53, but I'm not going to go through it because it would make this too long. I'll go through it in a separate podcast. But Proposition 53 basically says that we only have so much power. And there are many things that will happen that overwhelm us. that effectively, so for example, if you are trying to come from your own being, from your own understanding all the time, well, you can't do it all the time, but you're trying to do that, and something trivial happens. Maybe maybe your pen runs out as you're writing. Is that going to send you in a fit of rage? Well, I doubt it, unless you're sort of maladjusted in some way. So we can deal with a certain level of external stuff without it overwhelming us. But if someone comes and tells you that someone you love very dearly has died, you are probably going to be overwhelmed with grief and sorrow. And no amount of understanding or rationalization is going to help all that much until you understand one thing. And that is, when we are overcome by an external force that is stronger than we are put into a passive position. We are responding to an external event. But by understanding the nature of what has happened, we become active. So, it doesn't stop the grief in the case of someone near you dying. So, for example, where if someone has died, then to become active in that situation, we simply say to ourselves, I have so much power. This event has overwhelmed me and will continue to overwhelm me for a while. And it works. I shall go through Proposition 53 fully. I'm praising it there, but this is what Spinoza is saying. By understanding what has happened to us, and this is the power of the understanding, we diminish the intensity of the emotion that is affecting us. Because we become active. We understand what is happening. We're not trying to convince ourselves that we're not grieving or we should be stronger or any of that kind of bullshit. We are literally just saying to ourselves, this is the way it is, and I can understand what is happening. And the understanding itself helps with the situation. Anyway, I could go on for a long time about this, but 20 minutes is kind of the threshold for these things. I think if you don't think it should be the threshold, then let me know, but 20 minutes is the amount of time that we can concentrate on anything, I'm told. Anyway, I hope you found that useful. Propositions 6 and 7, which we will cover again at some point, are absolute gems, and I'm so glad that I was asked to talk about them.